Welcome to the My Bart story.
And hello to you. Today, we're taking a deep dive into a really challenging passage, Genesis chapter 19, specifically verses 1 through 11. We'll be using notes from various scholars, commentaries, trying to, get a handle on the insights, the context, the theology packed in here.
That's right. Our goal today is to really unpack this story a lot, the angels, Sodom's depravity as the text shows it, and importantly, pull out those core messages, those unique perspectives from scholars that can help our understanding and, our ministry today. It's a tough passage. It confronts us with sin, complex choices, and, divine judgment and protection.
It really is one that needs a careful look, almost word by word sometimes. There are nuances in the language, crucial cultural details from back then, layers of meaning you can easily miss just reading it quickly. But these things are vital to really grasp its power and relevance. So let's get into our study note and see what stands out.
Okay, let's start right at Genesis 19, verse 1. I'm reading from the NIV. The two angels arrived at Sodom in the evening, and Lot was sitting in the gateway of the city. When Lot saw them, he got up to meet them and bowed down with his face to the ground.
Okay, right away, a couple things jump out. First, the timing. In the evening. The notes mention this contrasts a bit with Abraham's visitors arriving in the heat of the day. Maybe just travel time, maybe a hint of, darkness approaching.
And Lot sitting in the gateway? That sounds significant.
Absolutely. The city gate wasn't just an entrance. It was the hub.
Like the town square, courthouse, marketplace, all in one.
Exactly that. Business, legal stuff, socializing, it all happened there. So Lot being there, it could mean he had some status, maybe a civic role. Some scholars think it might set up that later accusation. He wants to play the judge.
Ah, interesting connection.
Or maybe it was just the obvious place to meet people entering the city. Either way, his being there says something about his connection to Sodom.
And his reaction is immediate, isn't it? Bowing down like that.
Yes. Wei shall pay me or a face to the ground. It's profound respect. Our notes point out it's the same gesture Abraham used. It shows Lot recognized these weren't just any travelers. Maybe intuition, maybe more.
It certainly sets him apart from what comes next. Okay, verse 2. My lords, he said, please turn aside to your servant's house. You can wash your feet and spend the night and then go on your way early in the morning. No, they answered, we will spend the night in the square.
He calls them my lords, Jono, again, that deep respect. He sees their high status. And the offer of hospitality, well, that's standard ancient Near East stuff. Wash feet, stay the night, food. A sacred duty, really.
But the angels refuse at first. They say they'll stay in the square, the redden. Why?
Good question. Scholars have theories. Maybe a test of Lot's sincerity. How insistent would he be? Or, as our notes suggest, maybe it highlights how dangerous Sodom was. Perhaps even they felt the public square was somehow safer, or less likely to attract bad attention than a private house.
Or maybe just a way for the story to emphasize Lot's next move.
Could be that too. A narrative device to make sure we see how strongly Lot insists. It definitely creates a bit of tension.
And he really does insist. Verse 3 says, but he insisted so strongly that they did go with him and entered his house. He prepared a meal for them, baking bread without yeast, and they ate.
Yeah, insisted so strongly. The Hebrew verb is par. He really urged them, maybe even pressured them.
Yeah.
It shows how seriously he took this duty of hospitality. It was like a moral imperative for him. And here's something fascinating the notes point out. That same verb, par, is used later.
Oh, where?
In verse 9, describing how the Sodomites press Lot.
Wow. The same word for Lot, urging hospitality, and the mob pressing for violence.
Exactly. It's a deliberate linguistic contrast.
Mm-hmm.
Two opposing forces, both pressing, one for good, one for profound evil. It really highlights Sodom's moral inversion.
That's powerful. And he makes unleavened bread, quick, showing his haste.
Right, and they share the meal, a symbol of peace, fellowship, which makes what happens immediately after even more jarring.
Yes, the shift in verse 4 is sudden and chilling. Before they had gone to bed, all the men from every part of the city of Sodom, both young and old, surrounded the house.
Before they had gone to bed, no delay. The danger is immediate. And that description of the mob, it's critical.
Yeah.
All the men from every part, both young and old. Our notes, citing scholars like Matthews and Wenham, stress this isn't just exaggeration. Minarars etsakan kolhamim mkwai. It's meant to be comprehensive.
So not just a few troublemakers, but literally the whole male population across all ages.
That's the heavy implication. The narrator wants us to understand that depravity was pervasive, total. It wasn't hidden. It was the city's character, involving everyone from young men to old. This detail is crucial because it explains the justification for the total judgment that's coming. It wasn't isolated acts, it was the community's moral core.
That makes it so much worse. And verse 5 spells out their horrific demand. They called to Lot, "Where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us so that we can have sex with them."
Yeah, no mincing words here. Bring them out to us so that we can have sex with them. The Hebrew is "naitzion," that we may know them. And as the notes confirm, looking at Genesis 4.1 and other places, yo here means sexual relations, explicitly.
So absolutely not about just meeting them or finding out who they are.
Definitely not. Scholars are clear. This was a demand for violent sexual assault. Specifically, attempted homosexual gang rape. It's aggression, it's power play over strangers, it's a violation of hospitality, it sums up the city's lawlessness and deep moral corruption.
A truly appalling picture of their disregard for basic decency and the protection of guests. Lot then steps out alone in verse 6. Lot went outside to meet them and shut the door behind him.
He puts himself between them and his guests, shutting the door. It's a small detail, but significant. A desperate attempt to shield them, taking the risk himself. Brave, but ultimately well.
And he tries to appeal to them in verse 7 and said, "No, my friends, don't do this wicked thing."
He calls them my friends, Fry, literally my brothers. It's a last-ditch appeal to any shred of community feeling, any shared humanity. He names their intended act for what it is. This wicked thing, hara, a clear moral condemnation, hoping against hope it might resonate. It doesn't.
No, it doesn't. And then comes verse 8, probably the most disturbing verse in the passage. "Look, I have 2 daughters who have never slept with a man. Let me bring them out to you, and you can do what you like with them. But don't do anything to these men, for they have come under the protection of my roof."
This is, ethically horrifying. Lot offers his virgin daughters, and notice the language. Never slept with a man, uses yargi again, that same verb, to know. It's a chilling contrast to how the mob used it.
How do scholars even begin to unpack this?
Well, they wrestle with it. Our notes mention scholars like Wenham and Matthews place it in that extreme cultural context. Protecting guests, especially under your roof, Briel Schrei, was the absolute highest duty, paramount, sometimes seen as even above family ties.
So, not excusing it, but saying the culture put him in an impossible bind.
Exactly. It's not presented as a righteous act by the narrator. But scholars like Bruce Walsky point to this as showing the tension in Lot called righteous later, yet capable of this. It reveals the immense pressure, the corrupting influence of Sodom. Maybe the narrator uses this appalling offer to show just how wicked Sodom was, that it could drive even a host bound by sacred duty to consider such a terrible compromise.
It highlights the moral breakdown of the whole society, creating this unthinkable choice.
Yes, it's a tragedy born from a deeply compromised situation, not a model to follow.
Absolutely not. And the mob's reaction in verse 9 shows they have no interest in his desperate bargain anyway. "Get out of our way," they replied, and they said, "This fellow came here as a foreigner, and now he wants to play the judge. We'll treat you worse than them." They kept pressing Lot and moved forward to break down the door.
Complete rejection. Violence. Get out of our way. They call him a gator, a foreigner, an outsider with no right to impose morality on them. That accusation, wants to play the judge, show pure contempt. They refuse any standard he represents. Then the threat escalates. "We'll treat you worse than them." They intend to assault Lot even more severely.
Turning their violence directly on him now.
Yes, and the text says, they kept pressing Lot, weyiparubo. There's that verb piner again.
The same word used for his insistent hospitality.
Exactly, a complete perversion. His earnest pressure for good is met with their violent pressure for evil. Now they're physically attacking, trying to break down the door. Utter chaos and danger.
It seems hopeless for Lot, but then divine help arrives in verse 10. But the men inside reached out and pulled Lot back into the house and shut the door.
The angels, the men inside, act decisively, supernatural strength. They physically rescue Lot from the mob's grasp, pull him to safety, secure the door. It shows their power and their protective role over Lot. This is God's power stepping in directly against the city's evil.
And the first wave of judgment falls right away in verse 11. Then they struck the men who were at the door of the house, young and old, with blindness so that they could not find the door.
They strike the mob notice, young and old, again, emphasizing the scope with basan werim, blindness. Now, the notes suggest this might not be total permanent blindness, but maybe a temporary, dazzling confusion, like what happened with Elisha in 2 Kings 6.
So they're disoriented, stumbling, unable to even find the door they were just attacking.
Precisely. The Hebrew wayulu suggests they wearied themselves trying to find it. It completely neutralizes the threat. It's a direct display of divine power against their sin, and really a chilling foreshadowing of the city's ultimate fate, their helplessness before God's judgment.
Wow, going through it like that really brings out the intensity. Okay, so we've walked through the verses. Now let's dig into some of those deeper scholarly insights you mentioned. What are some of the aha moments or unique perspectives from the notes that really help us understand this passage better?
Yeah, moving beyond the play-by-play is important. One really compelling area the notes explore is that tension within Lot's character. We talked about verse 8, that terrible offer. Scholars like T. Desmond Alexander and Bruce Waltke really dig into this, especially alongside 2 Peter 2, calling Lot righteous and distressed by Sodom's lawlessness.
It feels like such a clash, doesn't it? How can both be true?
It does. And that's what's interesting. It suggests Lot wasn't, perfect, but maybe righteous relative to Sodom's utter depravity. We see glimpses of good, the hospitality, maybe the initial distress Peter mentions, but his choice to live there, his awful compromise here, it shows someone deeply affected, maybe worn down by his environment. It paints a complex picture, not of hero, but of a believer struggling and failing badly under intense pressure in a toxic place. It makes you think about how our surroundings shape us.
That's a really crucial point. It warns us about gradual compromise. What else stood out from the scholarly notes?
Well, Victor Hamilton points at a fascinating bit of wordplay with Yah, that word to know. Yeah. We saw it in verse 5. The mob wants to sexually know the visitors. But then in verse 11, when they're struck blind, the text implies they wearied themselves trying to know or find the door.
Hapta.
Yeah, right. Yada can mean to discern or recognize too. So the word they use for their sin is ironically tied to the resulting inability to even perceive reality.
Exactly. Hamilton sees it as a kind of divine irony. They misused knowing perversely, so they lose the basic ability to know or discern their surroundings. It's a subtle judgment woven into the language itself.
That adds such a layer. You'd totally miss that without the deeper look. What about the hospitality angle? Anything more there?
Yeah, Gordon Wenham really emphasizes how incredibly sacred hospitality was back then. Protecting guests under your roof, bole tree, was paramount honor, survival, everything. Understanding this helps us see Sodom's sin wasn't just the horrific sexual violence. It was a fundamental breakdown of social order, a violent rejection of a core ethical duty. So it was an attack on the very fabric of civilized life, not just on these individuals.
Precisely. It was radical anti-hospitality. Wenham suggests Lot's terrible offer, while absolutely wrong, underscores just how extreme Sodom's wickedness was, a society so warped it could push a host bound by this sacred duty into such an unthinkable moral corner.
So it paints Sodom's evil in even darker colors by showing the impossible situation it created.
Right. It highlights the societal nature of the sin, which leads to the next point.
The scope again. Young and old, from every part.
Exactly. Scholars like Matthews and Wenham really stress this isn't hyperbole. The narrator intends to show total community corruption among the men involved here. It wasn't just a few bad apples. The rot went deep through the whole barrel, so to speak.
So the judgment that follows is presented as a response to this pervasive community-wide wickedness.
Yes, and remember, the notes remind us, other texts like Ezekiel 16 broaden the picture of Sodom's sins. Arrogance, excess, apathy towards the poor, alongside their detestable things. So the violence in Genesis 19 is the flashpoint, the final straw maybe, demonstrating this deep, widespread moral failure that justified the comprehensive judgment.
These insights really add depth and complexity. Okay, let's shift gears now. Thinking about all this, the story, the scholarship, what are the key reminders or core teachings for us today, for believers, for pastors, for leaders?
That's where the rubber meets the road, isn't it? The notes point to several powerful takeaways. First, just the sheer reality of pervasive societal sin. Sodom reminds us that sin isn't always just individual choices. It can saturate a culture, twist values, make evil seem normal, leading to collective harm.
And it can be subtle sometimes, not always as overt as in Sodom.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the reminder for us is that call to be salt and light, like Matthew 5 says, to consciously resist cultural pressures toward immorality, injustice, or even just apathy. For pastors, that means actively equipping people to discern these influences, secularism, consumerism, whatever compromises biblical values, and teaching them how to live distinctively for Christ.
That task of discernment feels more critical than ever. What's another major reminder?
The danger of compromise. Lot's story is a chilling example. Even someone Peter calls righteous made a horrific moral calculation under pressure, likely influenced by long-term exposure to that environment. It's a serious warning for all of us about the environments we choose and the slow erosion of our convictions if we aren't careful.
It really emphasizes the need for personal vigilance and strong spiritual foundations.
Absolutely. And for leaders, it's a call to cultivate deep personal spiritual disciplines. Prayer, scripture, genuine accountability. We're not immune. If we're not rooted, if we don't have that support, we too can drift or make terrible compromises, especially when ministry constantly exposes us to the world's pressures. Lifelong spiritual formation is essential.
A very sobering thought. But is there also a positive example we can draw out, even from this dark chapter?
Yes, thankfully. Even amidst the judgment narrative, Lot's initial actions highlight the positive virtue of hospitality. His eagerness in verses 1 to 3 to welcome strangers, even before knowing who they were, echoes that strong biblical call, like in Hebrews 13:2, do not forget to show hospitality.
That idea of welcoming the stranger feels very countercultural today sometimes.
It really can be. In a world often marked by suspicion, isolation, indifference, opening our homes, our churches, our lives to others, especially those on the margins, the newcomers, the needy, it's a powerful, tangible way to reflect God's own welcoming heart. Pastors can really cultivate this, fostering a church culture where genuine welcome and care are practiced, not just preached. It's the opposite of Sodom's violent exclusion.
Such a fundamental Christian practice. Any other key applications that jump out?
One more, definitely. The divine intervention in verses 10 and 11, the angels rescuing Lot, striking the mob blind. It's a clear demonstration of God's power to protect his people and to act decisively against evil.
So even when things seem overwhelming, God is able to intervene.
Exactly. It's a reminder that when we face opposition, injustice, maybe even danger for our faith or for doing what's right, we're not alone. We can trust in God's sovereignty, his power to deliver his ultimate justice. That's hope for believers in tough situations. And for pastors, it's a call to preach God's faithfulness and power, grounding people's trust in him, not just in human efforts against darkness. He sees, he acts.
We've definitely covered a lot of ground today in this deep dive into Genesis 19.111.
We really have. We went through it verse by verse, noting things like Lot at the gate, the significance of words like yada and sansarim, and the crucial emphasis on the entire male population's involvement in the sin.
And we dug into those scholarly insights, the complexities of Lot's character, that ironic wordplay on no, how understanding ancient hospitality actually deepens our sense of Sodom's utter depravity.
Right. And then we brought it home, thinking of the reminders for us today. The danger of societal sin creeping in, the need to guard against compromise, that vital call to practice hospitality, and ultimately trusting in God's power to protect and judge.
So as we wrap up, here's a final thought for you to maybe wrestle with in your own context. We saw how sin permeated Sodom, involving everyone and including things like arrogance and neglect of the poor, not just the violence here. How might this challenge you to look beyond the most obvious sins and identify, maybe even confront, the more subtle forms of moral decay or spiritual apathy, perhaps consumerism, indifference to injustice, ethical shortcuts within your own community or congregation today?
Oof. That's a deep and searching question. It pushes us past just condemning Sodom's obvious evil and forces us to look closer to home. It's easy to condemn that, but what about the complacent ease, the looking away from need, the quiet compromises with cultural values that maybe we tolerate in our own lives or churches? Are we perhaps subtly becoming too comfortable, like Lot might have been, in environments that slowly erode biblical faithfulness? What does it mean to pastorally address not just the big, obvious sins, but also the slow fade of indifference, the grip of materialism, the reluctance to stand for truth when it's costly? It really calls for sharp spiritual discernment and courage to foster holiness and accountability across the board, guarding against sin's quieter but still destructive forms.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive. We hope these insights from Genesis 19 have been helpful for your understanding of Scripture and for your ministry.
Keep digging into God's Word. There's always more richness, more challenge, more grace to find. It truly equips us for serving Him. Goodbye for now.